but here's my thing. I want to put on my critical social justice. There are things that should be broken down. If the power structures of the world are not the way that I want them as an atheist, if I think that they're unjust, and by unjust, I don't mean by a standard of justice that is objective, that all people are accountable to, but literally to what I think the way things should be, then it makes sense that I would want to use language and categorization to restructure power according to what I want. And if what I want is a world in which gender is seen as fluid, if it's a world where where all of these things that have given white men an advantage, and I want to restructure power so that power gets shared more equitably, why is that a problem? Isn't this a noble goal?
Politics.
But what I'm saying is that we have to give the devil his due.
Sure. No, I agree. Absolutely. I know what you're saying. I would say that most atheists, and you can argue and say, but why? Right. But I would argue that most atheists have a morality of the golden rule. It is entrenched in them. And does that come from Christianity? Probably. It probably comes from Christianity. But they're going to say, because a lot of them are going to have that libertarian approach, which says, hey, I can go along with anything. You go be you, do what you want, but it can't hurt anybody else.
But
right?
See, this is the thing. Actually, let's actually go to this next clip. I think it's a good segue.
And that goes, by the way, that goes to the enlightenment value of the individual, which I would say was superseded by or was initiated before a lot more by Christianity than by the Enlightenment. It's what the Enlightenment carried over from Christianity.
Now, here's one thing though I want to push back on. Remember, if you get rid of sort of that there is a transcendent order to things, right? Then what's left is just what you want. Absolutely. I always say you can boil down the world to two things: preference and power. Preference is what you want, and power is your ability to get it, right? Now, from an individualist point of view, there's sort of see what the people who have this sort of mindset want is that they want a world of equity. They want a world where everyone has sort of, they're putting forth sort of a radical humanist idea. This is the way I see it. This is a radical form of humanism. And what it says is, if humans are ultimately the center of the universe, the highest thing we can do for human beings is to give them power to get what they prefer, right? Mm-hmm. As much as we possibly can. I think that is the end goal of the woke worldview. I think it's kind of like, well, what higher vision is there of the world than that people get the chance to have what they want, to get what they prefer. And if you prefer to go out and dress like a woman and all of that, you shouldn't be forced, or you shouldn't be, I wouldn't even say forced, you shouldn't have people looking sideways at you, judging you for that, right? You should. I would say
I have a little bit of that. I have a little bit of that feeling.
Well, let's actually go to this clip real fast. I want to talk about liberation versus liberty real quick. So if you want to pull this back up.
That's a big focus of what I talk about. Absolutely.
Yeah. And it's a very important distinction. Let's listen to this.
We kind of added our American mix to it, and now we're giving it back.
Yeah.
And so a dominant voice now at the UN is this intersectionality, but it's this religion, as you talk about, Marx focusing on the individual really and society. You get the ideas of the new man, mm-hmm. right, and the new woman. This transformation that, to me anyway, and tell me what you think on this. There's a difference between, for example, liberty and liberation. Yes. Right? This idea of liberation becomes what you're speaking of from Rousseau, Hegel, and moving forward. And this idea that we're going to throw off the shackles of society. We're going to throw these shackles off. The problem with that is that the problem is always out there.
Yeah.
Right. The problem is the system, systemic racism. The problem is, of course, focused on the West, is democracy and capitalism. But then compared to, say, for example, Christianity, where you have to say, well, I'm a problem. I have to change. I need personal responsibility to take hold of my free will and be something or become something. It's almost a perversion of that.
Yeah.
With social justice that says, yeah, you need to become something. You need to throw off the shackles of society, not I need to throw off the shackles of my mistakes, of my errors. Does that make sense?
Okay. So here are my thoughts on that. If you were born in Afghanistan, Greg, you'd have a very, very different worldview. In other words, and I'm going to use this from sort of I'm playing devil's advocate here a little bit. So what really shapes you isn't your choices so much. Your choices they actually exist within a very tight environment that you were brought up in that even gives you the ideas of what are out there. And so we don't have a ton of judgment for someone in Afghanistan acting certain ways because that's just the culture that they grew up in, right? That's just what they were socialized into. And so if everyone is being socialized into these different systems, then ultimately what we need to do is we need to change the systems themselves, because what makes man? That's the real question that James is asking. And we're sort of like, oh, acting like, no, society makes man, especially if you have an atheist worldview. So we have an obligation to throw off the shackles of these societies that oppress people, right? And so if I think, according to my own sort of subjective view of the world, that it is oppressive for people to be restrained in their sexuality, well, then I'm going to fight to free them from the oppressive shackles of the society that they're in, just like you would want to free people from oppressive structures that are out there from your point of view, right? So it's just a battle of power, and this critical theory is extremely effective at breaking down structures that stop people from doing whatever they want.
Sure. So a couple points here. Again, I don't know where you're talking as an atheist and from an atheist point of view and a devil's advocate, or where you're actually, is that all devil's advocate?
Pretty much.
Okay. So here's what I would say in response to that. I think you're right. Number one, it's extremely effective. I mean, we're watching it today. It is incredibly effective. But the problem is that, again, you even though you're saying you're going to the individual, as I said in that clip, you're not starting with the individual. And that's the difference, for example, between the gospel and an understanding of Christianity and choice and agency and atheism, is that, okay, if I go and I just say, well, everyone's just a product of their environment and a product of their biology, period, then all I need to do is work on their biology and work on the systems, right? And so I can change that. But if I believe,
so you can see though that if you're an atheist,
no question, absolutely, that's exactly where you would go. I mean, why not, right? Again, the difference is Western atheists. The difference, you're right in that if you keep going down the rabbit hole, that's where an atheist should be. Right. But Western atheists, most of them are built on the Enlightenment, where they have actually, whether they want to agree to it or not, and I think a lot more are starting to understand that their atheism and their Enlightenment anchor is built on Christianity. Because, I mean, look at Douglas Murray.
I have a clip for this exact part. I want to segue into this just because you are saying exactly what James says. And it was funny for me to hear him say it, because I was like, James, and some people don't know this. James was kind of part of the new atheist sort of movement. So to hear him say some of this stuff, you guys, this is a big deal for him to say what he says here. It's 47 minutes. Let's see here. 47:39 is where I want to start. Let me pull this up real quick.
Belief.
It's interesting when you bring that up, because this has caused a watershed moment for demographics politically, because you have those, therefore, that will not fall into that idea, that have been on the left typically. So you've got classical liberals, people that are really, they hold the Enlightenment as an anchor, right? And science as an anchor. And
my brothers, by the way, fall into this exact category as atheists who are also strong sort of libertarian types. Anyway, we'll continue.
So you've got a Jonathan Haidt and a Steven Pinker and others that even a Bill Maher, right? That are all of a sudden going, what in the world? This is not what I had signed up for.
Yeah,
I still hold on to these other truths, this science and what is produced from the Enlightenment. And so there's this shift. In a sense, of course, Trump pushes that also the other way, but it's this shift in demographically where you have even someone like yourself. All of a sudden, I see you working with a number of evangelicals, and because you're on the same page with a number of these things, whereas before it would have been completely on the opposite side of the gulf.
Right. Yeah. So the dividing line, and I find myself saying this more and more often. I was actually I think I was in a public conversation with Charlie Kirk at one point, and he put me to the test and said, what's going on? And somehow I came out of my mouth that the dividing line, the real dividing line here, to put it theologically, and then I'll kind of put it in simpler terms afterwards, but to put it theologically is the line is people who know that they're not God versus people who think that they might be.
Oh, he said it. He said it. That's exactly the difference. The difference is that some people recognize that they're not God, and other people kind of think that, well, they take the logic to its conclusion that, well, if there's no God, what's the next highest thing? And the next greatest power. And I would say that this is a very powerful argument. The next highest thing isn't you as the individual. The next highest power is society. Because you're subject to the society, like we just talked about, if you were born in Afghanistan, you're subject to that society and the way that it's going to form. And so
in their minds, in their minds and the way they teach it, that's right.
Exactly. But I think that this is the thing. We tend to think, oh man, these people are crazy. But I'm saying, no. If you get rid of God, and that it changes the power balance, the power dynamics, to use their words, of reality. You and I, Greg, operate from the position that there is a power in the universe greater than human societies. They don't, because what is more powerful than human society?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. The funny thing is that they won't tell you that. They'll speak that way and they'll talk that way in many cases about their solutions, because they know they've got to go to the society, they've got to go to the collective, they've got to go to the systems and change those. Therefore, they can socially construct you, right? That's the approach. But what they actually do in terms of recruiting and activism toward individuals, kind of their missionary work, so to speak, is about the individual, right? It's you can be you, and you can be accepted and tolerated, and all things are good, and you can do whatever you want, and everything's fine. And that's always been the approach. And for example, you get this with there's a certain line I've got. What's his name? Carl Trueman, right? Carl Trueman, who I saw speak a couple of years ago. A Christian. He talks a lot about expressive individualism, and that's the problem, is this idea of you can do anything. It's a postmodern approach, kind of, and before him there is oh boy, I'm going to forget his name. He's a Canadian philosopher where Truman's pulling from, and then today you've got Jeffrey Thane in the church that pulls a lot from this and does a lot of great work on this, really good work.
Fantastic.
Really like Jeffrey Thane. The problem, though, what is not brought up in that line of thinking is the collective, because what really is happening here, expressive individualism, is simply a carrot to bring you into a collective. Expressive individualism isn't the problem, right? Because expressive individualism says you can be anything you want, but in the end, what they really are doing is they're recruiting you to be exactly like themselves. and to think exactly like themselves and to follow very strict rules, virtue signaling to say, this is exactly who you need to be. So expressive individualism is the carrot, but it's a lie. It's a complete lie. It is no, we want you to come in and be part of the hive, right? You need to be part of the hive with us and do what we do.
Well, I'm gonna push back on that a little bit. Okay, first of all, I'm going to tell you what I think you hit perfectly. Okay, if God is not the highest power, then society is the next highest power. So society then takes the place of God, right? The social order is the highest power of the universe. And
the state.
The state. Okay, the state, society. No, but I even want to go beyond government power.
Okay.
Is I think that they talk about power in a way different than libertarians like you and I do. We tend to talk about power in terms of political power, like guys with guns who force you to obey the rules of a particular geographical area. They are talking about power in a sense that goes towards all power dynamics in any social system whatsoever, down to family, everything, right? And so what they're saying is that the social forces, both cultural, political, economic, everything, all of these social forces, this is the greatest power in the universe. And we want to, it is the de facto God. And that God should be a beneficent God, a good God. And for them, the highest good is to let people do whatever they want. Okay, expressive individualism is the religion. So society's the God, expressive individualism is the religion, and anyone who deviates from that expressive individualist ideology is a heretic. And not only that, if you and we need to break down any power dynamics that stop people from being their authentic selves, whether those are economic, whether those are social. Anything that holds you back from doing whatever you want that's the dichotomy that's the line between good and evil in this sort of religion. Okay. And ultimately, if I were an atheist, I'd have a very hard time telling someone why that is wrong.
Yeah, I agree with that. Again, I'm gonna push back on you.
Good, do it.
I want you to. Look, I mean, the God might be society, but I think that the religion is too. And I think that the message is expressive individualism, but it's not the religion. For example, if I am going to be part of that religion, and I say, the traditional family is by far the best option. That's my expressive individualism. That's how I'm expressing myself and my own beliefs and what I really want. I'm going to get hammered, right? I'm going to be booted out of the religion. And so it's not a matter of expressive individualism and being able to be whoever I want to be. It's not. They're not going to allow that. I mean, and you'll see that over and over again. People getting canceled constantly. You saw this in the 20th century with Trotskyism, for example. I mean,
but I think they're canceling you.
They were all booted out because they weren't quite exactly the way the Leninists started, and it's.
I think practically, I think you're right. But I think theoretically what they're saying is no, you can have your family, Greg. I'm trying to, again, give the best argument, what I think they would say to you. Say, no, Greg, you can have your family. What you can't do is go around shaming people who don't. And creating and creating a culture that says these people for some reason are less than and marginalizing people because they don't conform to you. You can do whatever you want, just don't marginalize other people and use your power against them. And I don't mean political power. I mean any kind of even looking sideways at them through your eyes and being judgmental. That is a form of oppression.
Yeah, but see, so I like looking at what is. And that can be even when I'm looking against gospel principles or anything else. I want to see what the fruits are. What are the fruits?
Marxists
so if I look at it today,
Marxists don't like to do that.
Yeah. So if I look at it today and I see exactly what happens when I go out and I talk about the family proclamation, or I'm talking about a traditional family being an ideal situation, it's not going to work for everybody. It didn't work for me in when I was growing up, but it's the ideal situation. I am going to be shamed. I'm going to be pushed back. And it's all from the same group. It's from those that are part of that collective. It's from those that start off with the idea, oh, this is all just expressive individualism. But really, they're all part of a collective. And they're sitting on this one specific building up really high, pointing their fingers down is what's happening. And so if I look at what is and how it actually happens, and if I even look through how the same ideologies have worked in the past in actual societies that have been taken over by this, I don't see any room whatsoever for tolerance. In fact, this is exactly what Marcuse goes over. He says that the tolerance, we need to have a really high level of tolerance for the hard left, for the leftists, so they can go and do what they want. But you cannot give even a tiny bit of tolerance to the right. And that is exactly the way they act, right? It is, you cannot have anything that is going to be against the woke ideology.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, the inherent in this sort of conservatism is the conservation of oppressive structures that need to be dismantled. Now, I want to...
There's actually a little bit of truth to that, but...
And sure. that's, I agree. I think that most of the devil's best work is done by mixing truth with lies, like he did to Adam and Eve in the garden, right? He says something that's true, but then something that isn't. Now, I want to put one other thing, though, for the atheist, right? We can say there's that great question. What makes man? What determines who you are, right? And we, as believers in agency, say, we do. You largely are the product of the way that you use your agency. Now, you're influenced by society, but ultimately we're all accountable to God, because with whatever light and knowledge we receive, we have the agency to respond to the influences that come at us. However, if you take that out of the equation, man is the product of biology and sociology, socialization and biology. Now, we talked a lot about the socialization part. Society is the great God. But there's another way you can look at this. You could be a hard materialist and say, if you're going to go that route, then your biology determines who you are. And you will be whatever your biology has made you. Okay? Mm-hmm. So these are really bleak pictures, because either once you take God and agency out, what you're left with is either you are a meat computer that is going to do what your meat programming has made you do. Okay. And if you got the wrong programming, and some people are programmed better than others to have better outcomes than others. This is social Darwinism.
I think there's some truth to that too.
You're right. We say that our socialization and our biology act on an agent, a person inside, but take away the agent. And if you're going to posit an agent, like, what are you positing? You're positing something transcendent, something divine.
Above the biology.
You're right. And I'm sorry, like, atheists, is that where we're going now? Are you guys all going down this road to where you have to recognize that human beings have a soul? I don't think you talk about, they go back to the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment becomes this like magical force where all truth came out of the
It is their worldview founding.
Yes. And the problem is they don't realize that the Enlightenment actually emerged from Judeo-Christian ideas. And it is very much founded on religious assumptions. Okay? These assumptions like that human beings actually have dignity and worth inherently, human rights. My biology doesn't give me rights. Does society give me rights? And a lot of them, like when I talk to my brothers about this stuff, they're like, well, yeah, society does. Like, we as a society come together and we decide, what rights people have. Who's God? Society. You mean that when the Nazis decided that the Jews no longer had rights, that means they no longer had rights because you get your rights from society? No, actually, the Enlightenment thinkers that founded our country founded on even Thomas Jefferson, who everyone wants to put out there as a big atheist, he said all men are endowed by their creator. And he knew that he had to put something up that transcended man, because otherwise that makes man God. And you have no rights if there is no God. What you have are privileges that are granted to you by the God of this world, society and the state.
Yeah. And, you know, it's really interesting because, and this isn't a truth, and I'm not a philosophical expert or anything. I've studied it quite a bit, but I'm not anywhere near an expert. And I know people who are, and I get to talk to them sometimes. But it's really interesting that you have at one point coming in the 18th century, the 1700s, really this entire thought process that starts coming through. And again, it's coming through Germany and Germany and German-speaking philosophy on the continent, on continental philosophy. It's not all continental philosophy, but it's a specific strain that is the most used and had the most energy and momentum. Mm-hmm. And then on the other side, you've got everything that behind what started to become a part of the American founding. And not all of it, but most of it was completely different. It was a different type of philosophy that started saying exactly what you're saying, that there are rights that are transcendent, above society, above man himself. And it's founded on this idea of religion and religious freedoms. I mean, think about just the concept of religious freedom. When you say you have you have religious liberty, you are saying immediately you have rights for something above individuals and above the state that you get to choose, right? That is not what's coming from continental philosophy at all. It's just the opposite of what comes from that side. And so you have these two strains that come in, the fruits of what you get on the other side that comes a lot through the Scottish Enlightenment. You get the United States and the founding of the United States coming through. And then you have on the other side this battle here that's going against what brings really a lot of the philosophical underpinnings of the founding of America that now are taking over today in America, where we had that. We're turning away from what built us into this society, and we're going to the other side. And one is built on that transcendency, God, religion, religious liberties, and the other side is built 100% on secularism and man.
Well, it was interesting. I watched the coronation of I forget his name, the new king in England, Charles. Mm-hmm. And I was shocked at the symbolism in that ceremony. Obviously, there were connections to temple ceremony stuff, but what was really interesting, and I didn't realize this, was how very much the English tradition is rooted in the idea that it is God who is above the king. And that idea of something transcendent being above the king, because if there's nothing above the king, then the king is God. But if there's something, which was the tradition in certain ancient traditions, right? Mm-hmm. That the ruler essentially was God, or even in totalitarian states like North Korea, right? But when you have something above him, then he's accountable to it. There's something transcendent. And we have gotten rid of the world of the transcendent. And as we get rid of that world of the transcendent, what we're viewing are the natural consequences. You boil things down to preference and to power. And that is the entire obsession of this movement. Okay. However, sort of the antidote to this, because I thought about this a lot as I was preparing this sort of steel man. And then I wrote my rebuttal to my steel man. And I actually went to the Lord of the Rings for the great rebuttal of the woke worldview. And that is that if you frame the world as a constant battle for power so that you can get your preferences, it descends into hell. Kind of like how the Ring of Power, you have the Gollum in his cave, like, oh, it's mine, my precious, I got the power. Everybody wants power. But what happens when you are the humble hobbits who love each other and you say, because we love each other, I'm willing to take the power that I could use to mold the world the way that I want it to be, and I'm going to cast it into the fire? It's the idea that Christ says, give all power to God, right? Surrender yourself to God. Okay? He has the power. And all we do is serve him and love one another, because there is truth. There is a transcendent order, a celestial order, as we would say, that we are trying to conform to, because that, I like to think of society and our vision of Zion like an orchestra. We all are different instruments. We're all different. But it's God who's trying to get us all to play music together. Now, to play music together doesn't mean do whatever you want. It's play your instrument and these musical notes, not because it's oppressive, but because this is how we make music. If you just go out there and do whatever you want and make noises with your instrument with everybody else around, it just creates chaos. There has to be a conductor who is guiding us into a way to play this music together to create something beautiful. And so these categories, these laws and principles that we're taught in the gospel are not oppressive. They teach us how to play music together with one another, not only individually, but also as societies. And I believe that this is manifest in reality, that the most successful societies are the ones that to whatever degree to which they embrace principles of the gospel.
Yeah, whether they're Christian or not.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes, absolutely. Whether you're Christian or not, the degree to which you align with this transcendent order that I believe is being revealed through God's prophets is the degree to which you prosper. And so if we want to prosper, we need people to learn to play the music, not do whatever they want, because we're not God. God is God. So do you enjoy the content here on Thoughtful Faith? If so, be sure to hit the notification bell. This ensures that our new videos show up on your feed. Also, be sure to check out our Facebook group called Thoughtful Saints, where myself and others discuss the sorts of topics found on this channel. And lastly, if you think other people would benefit from this video, please be sure to share it.